Well, good morning. Happy New Year, Life Church family. So glad you guys chose to gather here today. If you're watching online or whether you gathered here in person, so glad each and every one of you guys are here today at Life Church. We're hoping that regathering and reconnecting and re-engaging are a priority for you guys in this upcoming year. I had some little bit of COVID exposure last week, and so I will not be out front like I usually am when we're done, shaking hands and high-fiving you guys. I'll be back here hiding. I feel great, but I was around someone who doesn't feel so great. So I'm going to just keep with you guys for today. As you begin today, I'm going to ask you a question. That is, what will you build your life on in 2020? What are you going to build your life on? Where will you go for truth? You know, there's all kinds of people out there who want to tell you what to do with your life. Our world has no shortage of opinions. If you go on social media, it's overflowing with what's going on and why it's happening and how you need to respond. Everyone's going to tell you these kinds of things. Our world says a whole lot, but what does the Word say? What does God say? What does Jesus say? That's what this series is going to be about. We're starting a new series called Explained. And Explained, we're going to be hearing what God has to say about certain things. There's that Netflix special called Explained about various topics. And we're going to see a series of questions Jesus Christ is asked, and he's going to explain some things. We're going to hear what he has to say about some things. We're continuing our series through the Gospel of Mark. We've been walking chapter by chapter through this book, and now we're in the last week of the life of Jesus, and he's being asked all these questions. He's going to explain some things. We're going to hear his answers to that in this series. And so we're in two locations, really, in this last week of Christ's life. We're in Jerusalem and Bethany. And he'll spend the evenings in Bethany with his friends Mary, Martha, and Lazarus staying at their home, him and the disciples. Then he'll travel the 2 miles into Jerusalem in the daytime to interact, and that's how he will spend the last week of his life. And remember, the Gospels, about a third of the Gospels, about 33% of the Gospels are composed of the last week of the life of Jesus. There's a whole lot of material there talking about the end of his life. Today we're going to talk about something that is really the guiding force of your life. As you begin this new year, ask yourself the question, what is the driving and determining and guiding force of my life? What is that for you? We all have one. In fact, in a word, it's called authority. It's called authority. You say, what's authority? Authority is who's in charge. So you need to ask yourself, who or what is in charge of my life as I move into 2022? What authority is in charge of my life? There are different sources of authority. In fact, there are some primary sources of authority. And the world will tell you, the world will say, here's some things that should be an authority in your life. Here's some things should be in charge in your life. Here's some things that should direct and determine your life. And one of them, the world would say, is basically reason, what I think. If you want to know what truth is, what's right or wrong, good or bad, false or true, you have to ask yourself, well, what makes the most sense to me? What's the most logical? What does reason have to say about this? And again, our minds are very important, obviously, but the question is to be raised, and that is, should they be the primary source of authority? And of course, the world says they should have the final word. The world also says not just reason, but emotions. What I feel determines what is true and what is false, what is right or what is wrong. Your impressions, your feelings, your passions, your attractions, your urges, whatever makes you happy. So how do I determine what's right or wrong? What makes you happy? What makes you feel good? Now, our wide range of emotions are a blessing, no doubt. They're a blessing, but should they be the primary source of authority for our lives? The world says they should have the final word. How about experiences? What I have been through. Some people, for them, the world would say that what you have been through, I've been there, done that, I got a t-shirt, right? that should be your ultimate source of authority. And again, as valuable as our experiences are, and they are valuable, should they be the primary source of authority? The world says they should have the final word. Or how about tradition? What others have told me. This is really collective reason and feelings and experiences handed down to us from others. Someone saying, hey, this worked for us, it'll work for you. And this is how you determine what's right or wrong, what's true or false. Why do you believe that? Well, my grandmother told me this, right? Why do you do that? Well, our church has always done it this way, right? Why are you guys doing that? Well, my friends and I get together. This is what we've always done. It's kind of our tradition, right? And that becomes the final source of authority. Again, as helpful as this collective community over time tradition is, it should be the primary source of authority. The world says it should have the final word. So the world says any of these, really. What I think, what I feel, what I've been through, what others have told me, reason, emotion, experience, tradition, any one of these can be and should be the final source of authority. That's what the world says. But what does Jesus say? What does the Word say? Let me just cut to the chase and kind of tell you where we're going today in this series. And according to the Word, there's only one source of authority, and that is Jesus. What Jesus says. That doesn't mean we don't think things, don't feel things, haven't gone through things, have not been told things. It doesn't mean that we discount reason, emotion, experiences, tradition. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if what Jesus says is consistent and confirms with those sources of authority, we go with them. But if what Jesus says contradicts them, we don't. What I'm saying is, as important as those sources of authority are, what Jesus says should have the final word. And that's when we talk about authority, who's ultimately in charge. My thinking, my feelings, my experiences, what others have told me, is that the ultimate deciding factor, or is it going to be what Jesus has said? So we're in Mark chapter 11. If you want to find your way in your Bibles to Mark chapter 11, you can find your way there. We are in the last week of the life of Jesus. He goes into Jerusalem on a Sunday for the triumphal entry. He rides in on a donkey. People are throwing out palm branches, calling out Hosanna. On the donkey was the fulfillment of prophecy that he would be the Messiah. So people see him as their Messiah. They believe that he is. He's coming to deliver them. That's a Sunday. Then on Monday, he curses a fig tree. He sees that it is fruitless and therefore useless, and so he curses it as a symbol of Israel, because Israel was fruitless and therefore useless. And to even show he believed that, he goes later on that same day on Monday into the temple and begins to clear out the temple, turning over tables and turning over chairs. And why? Because the temple has become fruitless and useless, because it is prayerless and missionless. And so he's turning over chairs there, and so he's causing quite a stir, and the whole city has kind of been stirred up. Well, you have certain custodians and stewards over the temple called the religious leaders, the Sanhedrin. And Sanhedrin was 71 members of the highest Jewish court of the land, led by the acting high priest. And they don't like the fact that Jesus Christ has come in here and caused all this commotion. They think he's king and Messiah. He's trying to tell us how to run the temple. And so late Monday night, when Jesus goes back to Bethany, they have a quiet meeting in some place, a candlelit meeting in the Sanhedrin, and they're talking about what to do with Jesus. And they're talking about how they're going to handle him. Now, if you couldn't be there, this is before the days of Zoom, right? They couldn't zoom in, right? They were using rotary phones back then, right? Remember those? Well, I made a mistake. Only the people who are older are laughing at my jokes. That's okay, all right. It was before Zoom. It was before rotary phones. If you couldn't be there, you missed it. Sorry, stream people. That's where it was back in that day and time. And so, but they all gathered. That's how important it was. They all showed up, and they were going to talk about what are we going to do about Jesus. He was up in Galilee the past 2 years causing trouble, but that was 100 miles away, kind of out in the country land. You know, he's a hick from the sticks. Jesus was, right? You know, it was okay when he was up there, but now he's come to our town. Right? Now he's in Judea. Now he has come to the very seat of our power and authority. Who's in charge? He's gone to the temple and said it was his house. It's actually our house. And we don't like, who does this guy think he is? He says he has authority. He says he's in charge. And they're having a hard time with this. A lot of people, remember, are in Jerusalem. It's the Passover season. If you were a Jewish male and lived within 20 miles of Jerusalem, you had to travel in for the Passover. So the city is swelling with people. It is probably 3 to 4 times its normal size. And so the Roman military units are on high alert. It's kind of a pressure moment. The crowds love Jesus. So the religious leaders go, okay, we can't just because you notice he stirred up the whole temple, but he wasn't arrested. He should have been arrested by the temple police, but they called him off. Why? Because he was just too popular. They didn't want to riot. They didn't want to stir up trouble with the Romans. And so he's kind of having a lot of freedom. He's on a long leash, Jesus is. And they can't really turn him in and arrest him because the crowd would turn against them. So they meet at this meeting and they go, okay, the crowds love him. What can we do? What kind of questions can we ask him so he will indict himself? What kind of questions can we ask him so whenever he answers these questions, he will incriminate himself and the crowds will turn against him? We don't have to get our hands dirty. We'll just ask him the same things. He'll say the wrong thing and the crowds will turn against him and the crowds will crucify him. And so that is their goal, and they're trying to figure out these questions. This series, Explained, is going to be him answering their series of questions, and we'll do one today. And so he's walking around. Now it's Tuesday morning, left Bethany, goes back into Jerusalem, walking around Herod's temple that he had expanded, walking around the temple courts. And now remember, Herod had made this temple bigger and better. When they came back from exile, they had rebuilt the temple, but Herod now went through his construction project. He actually expanded it. It took him 84 years to do it. He didn't even live to see the end of it. It wasn't even finished back in this day and time with Jesus. It wasn't even finished yet, but it's already been expanded, a massive, massive area. It is the largest sacred site in the Roman Empire. You're talking about 35 acres. You're talking about 25 football fields you see on the screen. That's how big this space is, how big that temple is. It's massive. Holds about 75,000 people, all the courtyards. And so you have all these crowds. Jesus Christ is just walking through the courtyard. Mark 11:27, we pick up the story. They arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. So it's Tuesday morning. He gets there, he's walking around. Rabbis would normally walk around as they taught. They wouldn't sit, they would walk. He's walking all throughout these massive courtyards and having this conversation, and he's talking. Luke tells us he's actually talking and teaching daily. Sunday, Monday, now Tuesday, he's teaching about the gospel, Luke says, the good news. But these chief priests, teachers of the law, and elders, now they converge and descend upon him. And they are after him. Luke uses language as if they were going to attack him, not physically, but they were dogging him, and they were going to give him questions they didn't think he could answer, trick him and trap him. And so verse 28, they asked their question. They had planned the questions. By what authority are you doing these things? They asked. And who gave you authority to do this? And here's our key word for the day, authority. You say you're in charge, and it's a double-barreled question. What is the nature of your authority, and who gave it to you? We are the custodians of the temple. We're the ones in charge, and we didn't give you that authority. So who did? Who gave you this authority to be able to come in to do these things? What things? To walk around teaching, to toss over tables and toss over chairs. Who gave you this kind of authority? It's the issue of authority. Who do you think you are? Now, we've already seen his authority. We saw way back in chapter 1. It says he taught as one having authority. He had authority over doctrine. In chapter 1, he cast out demons, right? He had authority over demons. Throughout the book of Mark, authority over dangerous nature. We see him having authority over all kinds of things. Disease, authority over death, even authority over destiny. He had the authority to forgive sins. These religious leaders, they knew that he was doing things only God could do, and yet they refused to believe it because they did not want to let go of their power. And so all they want to do is trick him and trap him. They don't want truth. They're asking questions, but they don't want truth. If they wanted truth, he would answer them genuinely. Any legitimate seeker, genuine seeker, he would always answer them. But they don't want truth. It's a trap. It's a trick, and he knows it. And they're asking him these questions because they knew the Jewish tradition was that if you spoke out of place and you claimed to have authority, the authority of God, that was blasphemy. And they're trying to get him to say that. Jesus believes he has authority from God. We know he does. They don't believe he does, but they want him to say it. They want the crowd to turn against him. It'd be a capital crime. It'd be a death penalty. Well, in verse 29, Jesus Christ immediately is not defensive at all. He goes on offense. In fact, he goes on offense and puts them on defense. He replied in 29, I will ask you one question, answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. Okay, he said, I'll tell you what authority I'm doing these things if you tell me. Answer my question, then I'll answer your question, is what he was telling them. And so that was a common rabbinical practice, really was. You would answer a question with a question, but it's still a little unsettling because here he is talking to the highest court of the land in this manner. It'd be like you going before the Supreme Court and them asking you a question, and you're in front of the Supreme Court and you go, well, I'll answer your question if you answer my question, right? You wouldn't do that in the Supreme Court, would you? That's what Jesus is doing right here. It's an issue of authority, and they thought they had the authority, but he actually is the one right now in charge of the whole conversation. He was a master at debate, and here he is talking to them, and he asks them, and here the question he says, John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me. That's his question. I'll answer your question if you answer mine. John's baptism, from heaven or from humans? From God or from people? Now, John, who's John? He's talking about way back in chapter 1. If you hear when we started this series, a long time ago, walking through the book of Mark, John the Baptizer, John the Baptist. He claimed to speak from God. He was a prophet, and he bypassed the religious institution and had his own ministry out from under the authority of these religious leaders. Just like Jesus, he was kind of doing his own thing. But what did he do? He was the forerunner of Jesus. He was living out in the wilderness, and, they thought he was a wilderness wacko, right? You have the hick from the sticks and wilderness wacko. But they are connected because John was a forerunner of Jesus. John spoke, he says, the Messiah is coming, and he points to Jesus and says, there he is. So John and Jesus are connected. If they will affirm that John's from heaven, Jesus knows they're actually affirming he's from heaven too. And so he asks them this question, heaven or human origin? Which is a good question, by the way. By what authority do I live, by humans or by heaven? That's a question all of us as we begin this year should ask ourselves. Are you going to live by heaven, what Jesus says, or live by humans, what you think, what you feel, what you've been through, and what you've been told? Where were your ultimate source of authority? It is a good question he's asking them. Is this from God or is this from people? Now, they're in the horns of a dilemma here because if they say John's ministry was from heaven, then they have to explain why didn't they support John's ministry and why were they against John and why didn't they speak up when Herod had John killed? And why didn't they believe John's message, Jesus Christ was the Messiah? They couldn't really say that he was from heaven. They'd have to affirm Jesus as Messiah. On the other hand, if they say that he's of human origin, they're also in trouble because all the people believed he was a true prophet. The historian Josephus even records that, the fact that the people, the masses believed that he was a prophet. And so if he says, he wasn't really of God, he was a prophet, they would riot, the people would. So he's having this struggle here. What's he going to do? How's he going to address the situation? How are they going to respond? They can't answer. Either way, they're going to be in trouble. It's kind of like asking you the question, are you cheating? Are you still cheating on your taxes, right? If I ask you, are you still cheating on your taxes, there's no way to answer that question. It's safe. If you say no, that means you were cheating. If you say yes, that means you are cheating, right? You're going to indict yourself no matter what. That's kind of where they were on the horns of a dilemma. So verse 31, they discussed it among themselves, right? They gathered among themselves and began talking about it. They had a committee meeting. They pulled aside, right? They held up all 71 members. They had their own, and the language has the idea of a long, protracted meeting. Like it was a long meeting to figure out how they're going to handle the situation. And here's what they came up with. And as they were debating, they're talking, they said, if we say it's from heaven, he will ask them, why didn't you believe him? You didn't believe John. You didn't support him. You don't have supporting me. But if we say of human origin, they don't even finish their sentence there. They're just kind of debating and talking. As Mark is recording, he doesn't finish what they said. Now we know what they said because Luke tells us. What they said was, if we say it's from human origin, they're going to stone us. That's what they said. And they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they didn't know what to do. They're stuck. So what do? Verse 33, so they answered to Jesus, we don't know. Now they knew. What they wanted to say was he's from human origin. They knew they would get stoned. They couldn't say that. So they said, we don't know. I mean, these guys are full of pride. You know how hard it is for proud people to say they don't know something? I bet they struggled saying, we don't know, where they didn't know. Here are these religious leaders who supposedly, right, could discern spiritual things, now saying they don't know whether or not something's from God or not. It was their duty to know, but they had to confess they did not know. They had a belief about it, but they wouldn't say it. And so now they're kind of stuck here. The highest religious leaders in the land, in their own headquarters, had to admit that they didn't know what spiritual authority was and how to recognize it. So Jesus kind of dropped the mic, right? Just dropped the mic. He was pretty much done. And it says in verse 33, Jesus said, neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. He said, if you guys don't have the spiritual discernment to judge whether or not John was from God or not, then you don't have the qualifications to judge my ministry either. And he kind of drops the mic and walks away. Jesus had ultimate authority, but they were not willing to submit to it. And that's the picture you have to capture this morning. He had authority, he was in charge, but they wouldn't allow themselves to submit to it. Here's a question to ask. Is Jesus my primary source of authority? Is Jesus my primary source? You have to ask yourself as you begin this new year. Matthew 28:18, what did Jesus say? All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. I have all authority, he says. Are you submitted to the God who has all authority? Or we're like the religious leaders who are wanting to hold on to our power, hold on to something, and not submit to him. This is real stuff this morning, because here's the reality. You have to understand, if this stuff with Jesus is real, if Jesus is really who he said he was, then there is nothing more important than answering that question. Will he be your primary source of authority? The great Christian C.S. Lewis put it this way: Christianity, if false, is of no importance, and if true, is of infinite importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. In other words, if Christianity is false, what are we all doing here? I'd rather sleep in, wouldn't you? But if Christianity is true, we should be all in. We're talking about Jesus, who's Lord over all. He's all authority. He's our King. What we cannot do is have a moderate view of his authority in Christianity. We either all in or we need to be all out. How are we going to position ourselves? In verse 32, it says they fear the people. Right, they're afraid of the people. And it calls them to not face the authority of Jesus, not submit to his authority. They fear what they would lose. Proverbs 29:25 says, the fear of people becomes a snare. Fear is a snare. They don't want to give up their power, their lifestyle. The reason you and I say no to the authority of Jesus over us is we don't want to lose what we got. We are really much more like the religious leaders than we care to believe. We play games and ask questions and kind of push things out of the way just so we don't have to submit to his authority. Let me ask you, what is holding me back from giving Jesus control today? As we begin this series and begin this new year, you need to ask yourself, if he is authority, if he is in charge, what is holding you back from giving him control? It's probably fear, just like it was with them. According to polls, the number one fear that Americans have, you know what it is? Snakes. Anybody scared of snakes? Number two is public speaking, what I'm doing right now. And number three, it is heights. And we can go down the line, but I disagree with that study. I think the number one fear we have is not those things, as real as those are. The number one fear we have is giving Jesus control of our lives. We are terrified to do that. To totally say, I'm going to give you all authority, you're in charge. Not what I think, not what I feel, not what I've been through, not what I've been told, but what you say. What's keeping you from doing that? Giving him full authority over your life. What's keeping you from doing that? I think we're afraid he's going to turn over some tables. I like this table here. I like this chair here. I don't want him messing with it. What are the tables and chairs of your life you're afraid he's going to push over if you give him full authority of your life? The famous atheist Huxley admitted his issue with God was not intellectual, it was moral. And what he said was, the reason I don't want to believe in God, I don't want a God I have to do what he says. I don't want a God that's going to have authority over me. I don't want to lose my freedom. In the reality, that's why we also resist the authority of God. We don't want to lose our freedom. But let me tell you something. In the process of saying and pushing God away and pushing Jesus away and saying, I don't want to submit to your authority, in the process of trying to be free, we all find ourselves in great bondage to all kinds of things. And that's the irony of it all. I want to be free, and yet we're bound. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He says, the more we get what we call ourselves out of the way and let Christ take us over, the more truly ourselves we become. In that sense, our real selves are all waiting for us in him. It is no good trying to be myself without him. The more I resist him and try to live on my own, the more I become dominated by my own heredity and upbringing and surroundings and natural desires. Give up yourself, and you will find your real self. Lose your life, and you will save it. That is true. When you're under the umbrella of his authority, there is freedom, and you find out who you really are and who you were created to be. Today, I encourage you to submit to his authority. Say yes to him. Well, he drops the mic and walks off, but as we begin the next chapter, he tells a story, and we're going to just kind of tell the story and make some summary points and wrap it up. But he doesn't answer the question in chapter 11, but in chapter 12, he tells a story. He actually answers a question through the story. What Jesus says about who's in charge. What Jesus says about who's in charge, this is what this story is about. He tells a parable. A parable is a natural story that makes a spiritual point. Something familiar to us is told, and it signifies something that's unfamiliar that's a spiritual truth. And we learn from it. So in chapter 12, verse 1, it says, Jesus began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, and he put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. So there are 5 characters or 5 images in this parable. One is the man, right? He's the owner. Second is the vineyard. Right? He planted a vineyard. Now, those listening knew exactly what he was talking about. Those listening knew the vineyard was Israel. He didn't say it, but they knew it based on Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. That's kind of the backdrop of this, and they understood this, he was talking about that. Like if I told a story today, and I said today, if I told you guys, if I said, I'm going to talk to you about a nation. It's the home of the free, it is the land of the free and the home of the brave. Right? You go, hey, I think he's talking about us, right? You say, right? He's talking about us. I didn't have to say I'm talking about you. You know I'm talking about you by the imagery that I use. They knew he was talking about them. And so he talks about the story, and he has this owner, and he has a vineyard, and he plants, he builds a wall, and he builds a wine press, and he has a watchtower. They would put a wall oftentimes around these vineyards, and it was to keep animals out. It was to keep people out from stealing the grapes, you know. I guess they had no squirrels in Israel, because that would not keep a squirrel out, but anyway, it was to keep predators out. They also built a wine press made out of limestone, and hopefully they wash their feet first, you know. But they stomp on the grapes, right, and it runs down into the vats, and it creates their wine. And the owner also, not just a wall and a wine press, he built a watchtower, a place of shelter, a place of shade, a place of storage for all the equipment, and even for security. They would watch for people coming, because one of the things that enemies would do would be destroy your crop, and they were kind of watching for that. So they were set. This vineyard had everything it needed to be fruitful. He prepared it for them. Then he goes on to say that then he rented the vineyard to some farmers who moved to another place. And you have a third character. You have the owner, you have the vineyard, and you have some farmers. He rents it to these farmers, and the owner moves away. He moves to another place. Luke tells us he goes on a long trip, right? Gone for a long time, which was a common practice. We kind of see a picture here of a social situation in first century Palestine, where you had basically these wealthy landowners who would basically buy property, and they would go away. They're absentee landlords. They would lease out their property to other people to come and live on and maintain the crops and maintain the premises. It's very common in that day and time. There'd be some kind of contract where you guys stay here, I'll be over here. And when you begin producing fruit, you'll send me some money. You'll send me some produce, and I will receive some, and you can have some, and that's what will be your payment for actually living there. Oftentimes, it took 4 to 5 years to produce the fruit, and so he would be subsidizing them this whole time. So he's far away. Here are these farmers who are working the vineyard. And in verse 2, it says, at harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. So now you have the fourth character. You have servants, right? Owner, vineyard, farmers, and servants coming to collect payment. It's been a few years, now you're producing crops, and they have the responsibility to receive the contracted amount of payment. And that's why they're there to do. And it says, so the servant goes to collect the payment for the absentee landlord, and it says, but they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. What? They've been working there for 4 or 5 years and living off the generosity of this landowner, vineyard owner, and yet when he sends for payment, they actually beat him and they send him away empty-handed. And then he goes on to say that then he sent another servant to them, and they struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. So they have another servant, and now this one's actually hit in the head and insulted in some way. And verse 5, then still another, and that one they killed. So progressively it gets worse. He goes on to say he sent many others. Some of them they beat and others they killed. What a bizarre story. What bizarre behavior. Why weren't they paying their rent? Why weren't they paying their payment to the landowner? And why would this landowner keep sending servant after servant after servant? He should have sent a posse, right? He should have taken care of business, right? What is happening in this story? And it makes no sense, and it's designed by Jesus to create outrage. And so the ones hearing are thinking, man, these farmers are terrible. These farmers, what are these farmers doing? That they shouldn't be acting this way. And then in verse 6, he had one left to send. No more servants, but he has one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, they will respect my son. And it's the beloved son, the only begotten son. The same language is used when Jesus is baptized. The son, my beloved son, whom I love. When he's transfigured, at transfiguration, this is my son whom I love. And so, why would he send his son to these dangerous people, but yet there's no one left to send? He said, I'm going to send my son. They'll respect my son. Of course, everyone who's hearing is going, no, don't send your son to these people. And it says in verse 7, but the tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. Upon the son's arrival, maybe they assumed, oh, the son is here. That means the owner must have died. We haven't seen him in so long. Giving it to his son, he's the only heir. Let's kill him. And that day and time in Palestine, a tract of land could be possessed lawfully by whoever claimed it, if it was ownerless. And it was not claimed by an heir. In a certain time period, you could claim it as your own. They go, okay, he's the only one left, we'll kill him, and we'll claim the property for ourselves. So they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. Didn't even bury him. Let the scavengers have the body, dishonoring him. What's the interpretation of this story? Well, it should be fairly obvious. The owner is God. The owner is God. He is the owner of the vineyard. What's the vineyard? Israel. I already told you that's Israel. Israel is the vineyard, the people of God. Who are the farmers? The religious leaders. They're the custodians over the vineyard. They're in charge of the fruitfulness and the vitality of the vineyard. And we know this is true because at the end of the story, they're upset because they say, he's talking about us. Who's the servants? The prophets. Year after year, century after century, God had sent his prophets. And they were mistreated time and time again. Jeremiah thrown in the pit, and Ezekiel is mistreated. Amos is mistreated. Zechariah is stoned. Micah is beaten. Isaiah is sawed in half. And of course, John the Baptizer was beheaded. Nehemiah 9:26, they kill your prophets who have warned them in order to turn them back to you. The prophets kept trying to connect them back, and yet they were killed. And of course, who's the son? Jesus. Jesus is the son. He's not a servant. He's the son. There's not many. There's only one. And he's the last one. And they kill him and they crucify him. So here's some 3 thoughts about God and some questions as we wrap up. 3 thoughts about God and some questions for you. First thought about God is God's provision and patience. This story really is about God's provision and patience. God over time was very patient with them, and he provided for them. He gave them a wall. He gave them a wine press. He gave them a watchtower. He gave them everything they needed to be fruitful. Right? And he was the owner, and they were the managers. And yet, the managers, the farmers, tried to become the owners. They did. They tried to take over the property. A question to ask yourself today is, do I believe that God is really the owner and I am only the manager? Do you believe God has provided you with things for you to use, but those things he provided are really his? Do you really think you own your time? You own your gifts, your talents, your job, your house, your health, your spouse, your kids, your money, your hobbies? How many times do you say, this is mine, when the story really is all about the fact that it's his? He's the owner, we're simply the managers. And that's why we're so stressed out all the time, why we're trying to be owners when we're really only designed to be managers. And my call to you as begin this new year is stop putting this weight on yourself and you give it to him. Let him be the owner. Give it to him. Take what he has given you, provided you, use it to be fruitful for him. Use it for him. Question to ask is, what am I doing with all God has provided me to live life and to serve him? God's given you all that you have. He's provided everything you need in the vineyard to be fruitful, to be useful. What are you doing to serve him? And I encourage you to start doing things to serve him. And this authority we're talking about today, some of that authority has been delegated to you, to his followers. Use that authority under him and operate. It's time to re-engage. It's time to serve. If you take out your phones and you open up your app, and I'm asking you right now, take out your phones, right? Open up your app. The very first thing you're going to see is, you look on the screen here, as you open up your app, what you're going to see is this service at the top. You'll scroll down, a youth meeting coming up next week, a parent meeting. We got a glow party coming up, right? We got mission trips coming up to Mexico and Haiti, and we got, Daddy Daughter Dance, and we got evangelism class. We have all kinds of Financial Peace University. We have all kinds of things coming up you can sign up for on your app. But if you scroll back to the top and hit this, serve us, and click serve with us, you click on that, it'll open up this page. Then all you have to do is go there and give us your contact information, right? Let us know who you are, right? Let us know how to get in touch with you. Give us this information. And great, everybody has my contact information now. Now I'm nervous. Okay, just close your eyes for a second. But anyway, yeah, and so you're going to see all this. And then once you give that, you can tell us, once these boxes are filled out, you can tell us what area of interest you have, where you want to serve. You can click different areas where you want to serve, and right here in your phone, right where you're sitting now, you can do this. And if you really want to live a bold life, click the one at the very bottom. I'll serve anywhere, right? And that is a practical way you actually can start living a bold life this new year and saying, you know what? God's provided me all I have. I want to start serving him. Every week you have that 24/7 in your hand. I encourage you to use that to get involved and begin serving him. God's provision and God's patience, right? He's provided everything, and he is patient with us. Wasn't he patient with them? And he is patient with us. But he's given you a lot, and it's not too much, I don't believe, right, for God to ask for return his investment. And so we encourage you to bear fruit for him. So God's provision and patience. Secondly, God's grace and mercy. Right, he was gracious. He was merciful. Man, I'm reading this story, and I'm going, how gracious can he be? He sent servant after servant, prophet after prophet. He sends his own son. God sends Jesus. How gracious is that? And in the story, they actually crucify the son and take what belongs to him. And I started thinking about that, how we sometimes abuse God's grace and we mistreat his mercy. In what ways do I ignore God and try to take over his world as my own? When I read this story this past week, I'm thinking, man, I'm that farmer sometimes. Jesus wants to be my authority. He comes into my life, and if he wants to turn over a table or a chair that I don't like, I will nail him to the wall and take what is his that I don't want to give him. Oh, these are my kids, this is my wife, this is my money, this is my time, whatever it is. How many times do we take what doesn't even belong to us? How many times are we those farmers? And God is so gracious, and he's so merciful to us. But we become like that. We ignore God. We push him aside and say, you know what? No, this is my world. I'm the owner of the world. Well, one of my sons, he's 22 now, but when he was little, we go to the movies, and he wanted to get Skittles. I'd buy him Skittles, and he'd be sitting next to me eating his Skittles. And, of course, I purchased those Skittles, and he's eating the Skittles that I provided him. And we're watching the movie, and every once in a while, I'd reach over and try to what? I'd try to what? Take a Skittle that I bought, right? And you know what he would do when I did that? He would do this. What we all do when God says, I want something back, what do we say? Mine. That's what he would do. Mine. I'm all going, yours? Did you buy that? You know, we're having this little debate in the movie theater about theology, right? How many times does God say, I've given you all this, I provide you all these things, and I just want you to be fruitful and give some back? And we say, mine, mine. This new year, stop saying mine and start saying, this is yours. Everything I have is yours. I'm not going to abuse your grace and mercy. It's all yours anyway. Jesus is my last hope. There are no other options. In this story, he provided grace and mercy in sending his only son. I wonder if you really believe what's on the screen behind me. You know, nothing remains if Christ is refused. Do you realize that? No one else can be sent. You have all these messengers, and now he's the last one. Do you know if you reject Jesus, there is no other option? Do you realize this? There is no other gospel. There is no other sacrifice for sin. He's given you grace and mercy. Have you received it? Have you received his son? Today I invite you to receive his son. And the last idea in the story is God's judgment and hope. God's judgment and hope. We see judgment and we see hope in this story. In verse 9, he tells a story about these farmers who kill his son. And then he asks the question, what then will the owner of the vineyard do? I mean, what would you do? These people killed all your servants, and then now they killed your only son. What would you do? They answer, he will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Now, Jesus answers here. In Matthew's gospel, the crowd shout out the answer. They'll kill the tenants. And Jesus here confirms it, reaffirms it to them. Yes, he will kill the tenants. But they're in the story. The religious leaders are saying those farmers are bad, not realizing he was talking about them. Yeah, he will kill them. But there's also hope in this story in the sense that he will give it to someone else. God's work will go on. He will give his work to others. There's still opportunities to be fruitful. If you've been not using what God's provided you, you've been abusing his grace and mercy for a long time, you can still give your life to Jesus. You can actually submit to him and his authority, and he can start using you and producing fruit through you. Verse 10, he says, haven't you read the passage of Scripture? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Here he's quoting Psalm 118. That might sound familiar because on the triumphal entry, when he came in, they quoted Psalm 118. Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. They quoted that when he first came in. Now he is quoting it. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. That's part of Psalm 118. You're building something and you use a cornerstone. A cornerstone is real important when you're building something. And oftentimes the cornerstone is in the corner of a structure. And it's in a lower area. And so everything is built on the cornerstone. It's usually the biggest stone. It's the foundational stone. And so it is something that determines every measurement after it, every alignment after it. Everything is put in place based on the cornerstone. And he says, this is a reference to the resurrection. You rejected him, you killed the son, but he rose up again, and now he's the cornerstone of something totally different. Totally different. And they're there in Herod's temple. There were big retaining walls there that had big giant cornerstones, some weighing over 500 tons. They all knew what a cornerstone was. They're looking at him as he's speaking. Verse 11 says, the Lord has done this. And it's marvelous in our eyes. The Lord has done this. The Lord has raised him from the dead and made him a cornerstone. He's gone and switched up the analogy, right? From a vineyard to a building, from a son to a stone. You guys rejected him. You would not build your life on him, but that's okay. God has come along. God's picked up that rejected stone, and he's put it in place, and he's built something totally different now called the church. And he is the chief cornerstone of us. The final verse, verse 12, then the chief priest, the teacher of the law, and the elders looked for a way to arrest him because they knew he had spoken the parable against them. But they were afraid of the crowd, so they left and went away. Earlier in Mark, he had confrontations with religious leaders, and he told parables so they couldn't understand, right? Parables were to conceal truth early in Mark. Now we have confrontation, same thing, and a parable, same thing, but this parable does not conceal truth. This parable reveals truth. They didn't know what he was saying then. They know what he's saying now. You guys are the farmers. You're going to nail me to a cross. You're going to crucify me. But God will raise me up, and I'll be a cornerstone. And it'll be a marvelous thing, he was telling them. To reject Jesus is to reject the God who sent him and life itself. As we close today, I want you to understand that. If you reject Jesus, you reject God. To reject the Son is reject the one who sent him. And you reject life itself. But if you accept Jesus, to accept Jesus is to receive them both. If you accept Jesus, you have the Son and you have life, something to build your life on. And so as the worship team gets back in place, I close with a question. Will I build my life on Jesus, the cornerstone? Will I build my life on Jesus, the cornerstone? It's a question you have to ask yourself. Today's topic was authority. What will be the authority of my life? And I'm encouraging you to make Jesus your authority. To build your life. Everything you build in your life, everything you line up in your life, it's all based on him. We have a prayer and care room back here in the back. If you have questions about being a follower of Jesus, love to talk to you back there. And you can, during this last song or when the song is over, about what it means to follow him and make him your cornerstone. Will you pray? God, we thank you for this story. We thank you for this account where we're reminded at the beginning of this year that all authority is in Jesus. That means we cannot have a lax view of our faith. If it's real, if Jesus is real, if he really is God, if he is truth, if he is the cornerstone, we've got to build on him. For those of us who've rejected the cornerstone, may we confess that today. For all of us who have killed servants and removed the Son and tried to take ownership of what is not ours, we repent of that today. We do today what the religious leaders should have done. They should have repented when that story was told and said, Jesus, you will be our authority. You will be in charge. We will not reject you. We'll accept you as owner. We're simply managers. We won't hold our skittles because they're your skittles. It's all yours. We give it back to you. Use us and be fruitful and useful for your kingdom. And may we build everything on you in this next year. Everything that we do, may Jesus be the cornerstone. Everything we do, may we build it on Jesus. May he be the authority. May he be in charge. And if that's the case, we will have strength, stability, symmetry. If someone does not know you today, Father, I pray they'll come to admit their need for you and accept Christ as their Savior and Lord. And for all of us, we recommit ourselves to you this day, that Jesus would be our cornerstone, our authority. He's in charge. Who died and left you in charge? Jesus. He died, he rose, and now he's in charge. And we pray in his name. Amen. Will you stand?